The Disappearance, Westvale, was the kind of town you'd miss if you blinked. Cobblestone streets, whitewashed cottages, and a single road in and out. Nothing ever truly happened in Westvale until the night Brian Halloway vanished. Brian was a fixture in the town, the sort of man you'd nod to at the market or ask to fix a leaky faucet. Dependable, solid. He was 42, with calloused hands and a permanent sunburn from years of working outside. His laugh echoed often through the town square, usually after a pint at the Queen's Crown, the local pub. That Friday night in June started like any other. Brian played darts with his mates, wore his lucky red shirt, had precisely 3 pints, and even talked about the seaside trip he and his wife Jessica were planning. Witnesses say he was in high spirits, not a man who seemed burdened or desperate to leave. At 10:38 p.m., CCTV caught Brian turning onto the meadows, a quiet stretch leading to the woods behind his house. He waved at the camera. Then he was gone. The following day, Jessica Halloway called the police. Her voice was oddly composed. "He didn't come home last night," she said. "I'm worried. He's been stressed. Maybe he just needed to clear his head." But as investigators began their search, cracks in her story started to show. Brian's wallet, phone and keys were untouched on the kitchen table. His boots were gone, but his coat still hung by the door. That night had been chilly. Brian never left without his jacket. Volunteers searched the woods. Drones flew overhead. Police divers combed the nearby canal. Nothing. No blood, no trail, not even footprints leading into the trees. Then came the first real clue. A neighbour, Mrs. Megan Penrose, a retired school teacher, came forward with something strange. "I couldn't sleep that night," she said. "I heard crackling. Looked out my window. Jessica, in her dressing gown, was burning something in a metal bin behind the shed. It was almost midnight." Police found the fire bin the next day. It was scrubbed clean. Too clean. But a forensic team recovered partially melted zipper teeth and what looked like the remains of a phone case. The fire had destroyed almost everything. Almost. Still, Jessica had an answer for everything. "He left me," she told reporters. "He said he needed space." But those who knew Brian said he would never leave Jessica like that. Not without a word. Not without taking his things. Not without saying goodbye to his dog, Jacko, who waited by the front door. A rumour began to spread in the following days. Brian had planned to leave Jessica, not for space, but for someone else, and that Jessica had found out. No one could prove it, not yet. But in Westvale, the Halloway's house began to feel colder. Its windows are darker. And the once beloved Jessica, who baked for fundraisers and tended her roses, was now the subject of sideways glances and hushed voices. The question wasn't just where Brian had gone. What exactly was Jessica burning that night? And why did she scrub the fire bin with bleach the following day? The investigation quickly stretched beyond the woods and waterways of Westvale and into the shadows of Jessica Halloway's private life. Detectives returned to the Halloway's home, armed with a warrant. Inside, they found a house that wasn't just tidy, it was obsessively clean. The downstairs bathroom had been freshly painted, the curtains recently laundered, and the scent of bleach still hung faintly in the air. It struck them as strange. Jessica had told them she was distraught, but this level of domestic perfection suggested something else entirely. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, nothing obviously out of place, but that in itself was troubling. When asked to show Brian's belongings, Jessica complied. She opened the wardrobe, revealing neatly folded shirts and jackets. His work boots were lined up with care. A pair of sandals sat near the back door, still damp from the last rainfall. Nothing appeared to be missing. As for his phone, Jessica barely hesitated. It was old, she said. He probably left it or dropped it somewhere. But forensic analysts had already found something that contradicted her claim. Remnants of what looked like a melted phone case and zipper teeth in the ashes of the fire bin behind the shed. Then came another break in the case. Detectives gained access to Brian's bank records. There hadn't been a single withdrawal, purchase, or login since the night he disappeared. His bank cards remained untouched. Friends later told police Brian was obsessed with checking the football scores. For him to go completely silent was not just unusual, it was alarming. Jessica's behaviour after the disappearance raised more eyebrows. She cancelled their planned seaside holiday 3 days after Brian was reported missing. At the time, it seemed understandable, but then, just 2 days later, she was spotted at the local florist. She bought a bouquet of deep red roses, Brian's favourite. She said they were for the garden, the florist recalled. But the way she looked, her eyes were blank, like she was pretending to feel something she didn't. Soon after, whispers began circulating about a man. A stranger had been seen leaving the Halloway property in the early hours of the morning, about a week before Brian went missing. He was tall, wore a dark coat and a low cap, and disappeared quickly down the lane. No one recognized him. No one knew his name. By then, Jessica was no longer viewed as a grieving wife. People in town started to cross the street when they saw her. Cautious parents ushered children away. The vicar's wife stopped inviting her to Sunday teas, and her book club meetings quietly ceased. Westvale turned cold. The once charming Halloway house, with its ivy-covered walls and carefully kept bird feeders, now seemed still, watchful, off. Only Jacko, Brian's loyal Labrador, still waited at the front window, his eyes locked on the door, like he expected someone to walk through it at any moment. Then, just as the investigation began to cool, a neighbour from 2 doors down stepped forward. Dave Smith, a retired bus driver, remembered something strange. "I didn't think it mattered at the time," he said, "but I remember hearing a loud thud that night, just after midnight, like someone had dropped something heavy in the garden. I assumed it was bins being knocked over, but now..." That detail led police back to the garden. This time, they brought ground-penetrating radar. It revealed something unsettling beneath the newly laid gravel, disturbed soil. Digging carefully, they discovered faint traces of ash and pieces of charred fabric. The soil had been soaked, likely in an attempt to hide any remaining evidence. But there was no body, no bones. Not yet. Despite growing suspicions, there was still no physical proof of what had happened to Brian. And while the town of Westvale held its breath, Jessica began quietly preparing to sell the house. No one was asking if something had happened to Brian Halloway anymore. They were asking when, and just how long Jessica had been planning it. The listing for the Halloway house went up quietly. No for sale sign on the lawn, just a subtle online ad placed through an out-of-town agency. But Westvale was small, and news travelled faster than weeds in spring. "She's running," someone whispered at the bakery. "Guilty people don't stay put," said another. The police weren't ready to arrest her. At least not yet. But they weren't done watching, either. Detective Inspector Lorna Bell had taken over the case 2 weeks after Brian disappeared. She wasn't one for press conferences or sweeping statements. She preferred quiet diligence and had her eye on Jessica from the start. "I don't believe in perfect crimes," she told her team, "only unfinished ones." So when Jessica visited the estate agent in neighbouring Greystone, Di Bell had already arranged for someone to tail her. When Jessica's internet search history was recovered, revealing late-night searches like how long before a body decomposes outdoors, burn temperature of synthetic fabric, and selling a house after a missing person case, Di Bell knew they were circling in. Still, none of it was enough. Not for a charge. Not for a trial. Until the envelope arrived. It was postmarked from London, unsigned, and addressed to Westvale Police. Inside was a single Polaroid, grainy, dark, but clear enough. A man in a red shirt, Brian's lucky red shirt, was lying on the Halloway's patio, eyes closed, a smear of something dark near his temple. The timestamp read 11:04 p.m. The night Brian disappeared. There was no note, no return address, just the photo. "Someone's trying to talk," Di Bell said, "or warn us. Maybe both." They brought Jessica in for questioning again. This time, they showed her the photo. She blinked once, tilted her head. "That's not Brian," she said, voice flat. "That shirt was donated weeks ago." "But you told us he wore it that night," Bell countered. Jessica smiled faintly. "Did I? You must have misremembered." They held her for 12 hours. She never broke.